This is a Film Stories original podcast.
We made this!
Welcome to the Starlight Ballroom. Hey!
Hello and welcome to this special We Made This Podcast Network presentation of Shipwrecked and Comatose, sort of. This is one of our weird crossovers because it is the 5th anniversary of our podcast network, the We Made This Podcast Network. My name is Mark and I am one of the hosts of Shipwrecked and Comatose. I am also one of the hosts of ChuckyVision. And we're reposting 3 ChuckyVision episodes in 3 days on the Shipwrecked feed because those 3 episodes featured hosts from Shipwrecked and Comatose. First up was Matt, then Kurt, and today's has Matt back. So 2 Matts, same Matt but 2 different occasions. And whilst these are tenuously linked to Shipwrecked and Comatose in as much as it is just our hosts, they were actually kind of cool to do last year when ChuckyVision did some crossovers before we knew that we were supposed to be doing crossovers for the anniversary. As a curiosity, we thought we'd post these 3 here before we do some more crossovers with potentially less tenuous links later on this month. Keep your eye out for that. We've got some really fun things planned. But in the meantime, please enjoy the 3rd of 3 reposts from ChuckyVision. This time, Matt joins me for a chat about Angel, the spin-off series from Buffy. Hello and welcome to ChuckyVision, the podcast about Chucky and things related to him here on the... I made that sound like there is relatives rather than adjacent media, but I know what I meant. When we're on the We Made This Podcast Network. My name is Mark and I'm your host, and I'm already doing a particularly bad job. With me at this time, as always, well, most of the time, is my co-host Dev. I might stop doing that gag eventually.
Hello, everyone.
We're also being rejoined by Matt Latham. Hello, Matt.
Hello, Mark, and I'm so glad that I've been witness to what is clearly an experienced podcaster being able to introduce an episode.
Oh, yeah, that was me at my very best, that. This episode is kind of like sort of a bonus, but not really. We got excited about Smile Time when we recorded our Buffy episode, and we said we should do that, so we're doing it. And now our 2-episode specials has become 3-episode specials. Hooray! So Yay. We thought we'd bring back Matt. So yeah, we're doing an episode of Telly featuring a puppet, and in an almost kind of like sequel to when we looked at the episode, what was the episode called, Buffy?
The Puppet Show.
To The Puppet Show, a Buffy episode featuring a ventriloquist dummy. We're doing Smile Time, an episode of Angel that features a more kind of Muppety puppet kind of thing. Made sense to have Matt back because, you know, big Buffy fan, innit?
Mm-hmm.
So Smile Time was season 5, episode 14 of Angel, and it was broadcast in the United States in February 2004, which means that it still preceded Seed of Chucky by about 6 or 8 months. In our kind of like Chucky timeline, we are up to Bride of Chucky, which means the Buffy episode was pre-Bride of Chucky. So we have had a film since, if that makes sense. Quick thoughts. Do we think that Bride of Chucky existing has influenced this in any way? I don't really feel like it has.
No, I would say this is probably less Chucky than the other episode, the Buffy episode was.
But that episode actually referenced Chucky, which this certainly does not. Like I said at the start, it is a bit more Muppety.
It's evil Sesame Street.
That's actually a really good way of putting it. Now, this particular episode is pretty well loved by the fandom, and it was nominated for a Hugo, and it even generated a toy line based around the puppets. And you said it was evil Sesame Street, and it actually used Henson puppeteers. So,
is it Joss Whedon that has a connection to the Muppets?
His dad was a writer. So Tom Whedon was a writer for the Muppets.
Yeah. Is Tom Whedon still going? Did he write for Buffy or anything?
No, he passed away in 2016. He went to go and work for the Children's Television Workshop. So I think he became a head writer for the Electric Company in season 2. Also wrote for the joint Sesame Street Electric Company special Out to Lunch. And yeah, and that was it. And I think he also wrote for the Golden Girls, Dick Cavett, Alice Benson, Captain Kangaroo, and Between the Lines. I have no idea who. I've heard about one of those shows, but I need to click on. I need to find out what Captain Kangaroo is.
Captain Kangaroo does sound good. So a cold open is really fucking creepy, actually. Very kind of comfortable putting this into a podcast about horror films. The touch it thing. Do we feel like that was supposed to feel a bit pedo?
It's definitely darker. You can really tell the experience gained by everyone from Buffy to this. Like the whole puppet show with the ventriloquist doll. It was all very surface level, like, oh, isn't a ventriloquist doll scary? And they didn't necessarily really do anything with it or any twist or anything like that. It was, I mean, Buffy would go on to have some very creepy, unnerving episodes, but season 1 Buffy is not that scary. Whereas here, yeah, this whole cold opening has a very unnerving atmosphere. They've really learnt how to put actual horror into this show now. Yeah, it's not unintentional. Like, they didn't know what they were doing.
Well, Angel was always, from the outset, meant to be much darker than its parent show anyway. I think highlighting a slightly more sinister, kind of darker threat, I think kind of deliberate. Particularly as watching this, usually being kind of preconditioned, particularly when there's kind of children involved in drama or anything that happens to children is usually off screen. And what shocked me was the visual of the child.
Yes, the really nasty Joker smile.
Yeah, and that was actually quite effective. And I've not watched this since I think it first aired. So it's been about 19 years since I've watched this. And I completely forgot about that. And that almost nearly jump scared me. I was like, oh, bloody hell.
Yeah, this was my first time watching the episode. And my knowledge of this, I'd seen the pictures and the scene of Spike versus Angel. I'd seen stuff like that, so my knowledge of this episode was that it was a very funny comedy episode, and there is comedy in it, but it's handled quite well with the horror. I didn't realize the horror was going to be so effective in this episode as well.
And as cold opens go, some of the Angel, some of the Buffy ones, they're just kind of there because the tradition was to have a cold open. Some of them are really, really effective. And this one is one of the strongest cold opens I could have named for you that they ever did on Buffy and Angel. I
think it's a scarier type of villain as well. We would compare it to the horror they were doing in the puppet show with that cold open, which was that old ChuckyVision cam, running around, running into people's knees and stuff. I mean, it's campy horror. This is scary than the Muppets going around attacking people. They can get to people through the TVs. It's kind of like The Ring almost.
What I think it kind of highlights again the kind of difference between these and the Buffy episode in terms of its kind of scope and what Angel was always meant to do. Angel was always meant to feel bigger. It was like threats were meant to be a lot more wider, more epic. I've always felt that the apocalypses on Angel were actually kind of world-threatening, whereas with Buffy, it kind of always felt anything that erupted will probably just not get past the town borders. But here, where you've got a kind of puppet attacking about 20 kids in a talent show, here you've got something that can easily go across my knowledge of TV setup or how television works or local TV works in LA. But what you've got something that is going around the entire city of LA, which means there are millions and millions of potential victims as opposed to 20. So the threat is immediately established. As the episode goes on, it kind of does highlight that, yes, this is something that's a lot bigger. There's a lot more of a threat to a lot more people, from the get-go.
And then they have the Angel spell on it. If this was a Buffy Monster of the Week, they'd be like, oh no, they're going to devour the children's souls and stuff. But this is Angel, where everything is business related.
Yeah.
So they're going to use the souls to bargain their way through hell. It's like a business thing for them.
It really is one of those things that kind of highlights the difference between Buffy and Angel. It feels like Angel was always aimed at people who started as teenagers watching Buffy but are now in their early 20s or late teens at least. The subject matter here really is a nastier, more controversial subject matter, and the opener is just genuinely sublime and creepy, and a really, really good just couple of minutes of scene setting that I knew this episode. I've watched this episode quite a lot, but rewatching it for this, I was like, damn, that was really good.
Again, another scene of good creepiness is when Angel goes to investigate the place. It's just especially comparing it to the puppet show again. I swear maybe season 1 uses quite a bit of like stock music and stuff, but yeah, it's never really serious like music until like later seasons. But yeah, there's like a weird, like almost David Lynchian ambient drone in the score that is very creepy. The back lot, the janitor, and then just the really weird don't room with the guy with the towel on his head, and then the big egg with the smile on it. Just really, I don't want to say mature, but it's more visually not obvious. Do you know what I mean? Like, oh, this is meant to be scary. It's a monster. It's like a guy in makeup. Like, it's a weird horror.
Talking about music, this is one of my favorite television theme tunes of all time. The Angel theme is so sublime. Fits the program, and it just feels like it fits so well with what they were trying to do with the vibe of the program, making it a bit more adult, but still available to kids. And yeah, I just love this theme tune. Is it a favorite of yours, Matt? Or
oh, definitely, to the point where watching this episode I ended up carrying on watching the DVDs up until the end of the season over the next few days.
Brilliant.
So I finished season 5. Still haven't watched the first 13 episodes of season 5 is now that I still haven't watched since the show first aired, but every single time, well, one, mainly because I was watching on DVDs, and I did suddenly try and reach for the skip intro button at first, and then realised, no, I'm on DVDs. But then, like, I'm like, why am I skipping this? This is great. And there's just a sense of nostalgia that just hit.
The theme tune really hit me with nostalgia as well. Seeing Andy Hallett on the credits, it took a long time for his character to get on the credits, and seeing obviously Alexis Denisov, I think you and I mentioned this in the last time we talked about the Buffyverse, that the Wesley character starts as a joke that was supposed to be there for 5 minutes and becomes what we see here, which is incredible storytelling.
Well, he's a parody of season 1 Giles in Buffy, and it's to show just how much the character of Giles has developed in 2.5 seasons. And now he's, if I'm honest, I've always thought he's ended up becoming a much better character than Giles.
Oh, I'm not so sure I'd agree with that, but I love both of the characters. So.
Oh, no, I think Wesley is probably one of, or at least in a shoe-in. I've never thought of the answer to this question, but in terms of my favourite character in the whole of the Buffyverse, Wesley's possibly a shoe-in for number 1.
I think he's close for me as well. I'll tell you who isn't on the credits yet, and I thought she was at this point. Mercedes McNabb, who plays Harmony.
She turns up in episode 17. Yeah, so she shows up in a few episodes' time.
Yeah.
They pretty much use it as a, I think it's the same time that they change or tweak the credits to show Illyria instead of Fred.
Right. These credits are just so nostalgic for me. It just made me smile.
The introduction, the first 10 seconds or so, those things have never changed. So you've got the opening bit where you suddenly see, like, Angel kind of just, like, with the sword, and then you've got that kind of young man who looking up, kind of like despair, which I can never remember if it's from an episode or not. But then there's a blonde woman who I think's in one of the earlier episodes. I think she's in the darks in this first Spike episode. I think she's the blonde woman who Spike's going, never there, never there. And like, goes, working up below this place called tension and prancing away like a magnificent move is all enough for me. That scene.
I remember that scene vividly.
Yeah, I think it's her, but she's always been in that first part of that. And then you have the shot of Angel with the sword, and that basically hero shot where he rips the doors down in Vamp Face as the kicks in. That's always been the same.
Which they didn't do with Buffy. It was completely new for each season.
Yeah, I think there's always that kind of weird shot with him where Angel's kind of like looking kind of slightly distressed. That cuts in with the group hero shot they always change in. And it ends with that kind of like really cool walk down an alley, which has always been the same.
That walk down the alley is iconic. I think it's from the very first episode as well.
I think it's pretty much after he kills Sawyer from Lost.
Wow. You had to get a Lost reference in.
Well, the first vampire in the show is Josh Holloway.
Anyway, so my first note after the theme tune and our inevitable gush about it is, fuck Knox, Wesley should have got the girl. That was very much my kind of feeling for the first 13 episodes of this. And as like ongoing storylines go, it's one of my favorites because Wesley's awkward and terrible with people that he fancies and always has been, and hard relate.
We're getting into it. We're getting into all the character stuff, but yeah, just to get it out there. Before this, I've seen precisely one Angel episode, which is the pilot.
Wow.
I was telling Matt about this before. I have browsed the wiki, so I know who most of these characters are. I know that the Fred and Wes romance is going to go great places for the rest of season 5. So I know things that happen. But yeah, watching this, Knox did not give me the impression that he was an actual character.
This is actually a really interesting perspective because obviously Matt and I wank over Buffy and Angel, whereas coming into it not knowing, well, kind of only having an overview of what's going on. So which characters stuck out to you? You said that Knox definitely didn't. Which character stuck out to you as the most interesting?
Well, most of them I seem like they belong on the cast, like Gunn and Wesley and Fred and stuff. They all seem like part of the main cast. Knox, for me, though, I could not tell you if Knox was a regular, because he's not in the credits, is he? Like the opening credits. No. So I don't imagine he's a regular, but is he a big thing at all? Because he seems just kind of annoying in this episode.
He's basically the character that's there to kind of just basically create a love triangle, another love triangle, just to stop Wesley getting the girl. His reason for being is pretty much explained in the next episode. So by then I'm not sure how much you want to be spoiled. So
in the trivia and stuff, I've read that there's a lot of setups in this episode for big things that happen.
Actually, yes. Yeah, that surprised me. I've forgotten about that bit. So I wasn't, because I was going to watch it and then I'm like, yeah, what do? Because I knew what was going to happen. I was going to watch it and I think, I'm going to go back and probably rewatch Angel. And recently, today, managed to get access to Disney Plus again, so I might go back and start Angel from scratch. But then what happened is that there was these things that were setting up. I was like, I've forgotten that. I didn't realise they were setting things up. Well, the next episode in this one, that was going to come back to haunt, basically, that will basically kick everyone in the arse.
It reminds me of just how pivotal, beyond being cool, the musical episode of Buffy was. Lots of really deep, heavy stuff that affected the rest of the season was dropped in what you could consider to be a relatively frivolous episode. And this is almost a parallel of that. This is a frivolous episode where Angel becomes a puppet, lol. But, the Gunn storyline, which then leads into the Illyria storyline and then the Nina storyline, everything progresses quite significantly in this, like it did in Once More with Feeling.
See, I think Once More with Feeling is the end of the first act of season 6. I think that's more or less like a closer rather than, I don't know if the parallel works. I can see your point in that it's saying, this is how the shows kind of balance the gimmicks with, actually, no, there's something happening in this, but this feels like it's setting up Act 1 or setting up the last act of the third act for the season rather than closing. So Once More with Feeling is the cap of season 6. So season 6 part 1 leading into Buggy Rossa and everyone finding out that Buffy was in heaven, blah, blah, blah. This is more a case of, we'll have a funny episode. Look at Dave Boreanaz voicing a puppet. Look at all the Muppety stuff. But what we're actually doing is we're starting to seed in, really dark stuff, which is going to fucking traumatize you in a couple of episodes' time.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's an interesting parallel, but I don't know how intentional that was because, again, I haven't seen it. I'm just going off notes, but from what I read, they were planning a season 6, and these plot lines were going to be season 6. And then they learned that, season 5's it. So a lot of these... Okay. So the reason why Knox, to me, doesn't feel like a big character, and the reason Fred is just like, fuck off, we're not going out anymore. The reason that happens so suddenly is because they're like, oh, fuck, we've got to do the West Fred endgame, now.
Okay. I didn't actually know that, but that makes a lot of sense.
That's curious, actually. Because I know it was cancelled, but I'm sure they had notice.
But it's where they had the notice.
Yeah.
I think is what Deb's getting at.
The plans for, Illyria is going to there's going to be a whole thing where Amy Acker will be playing the two of them, so a couple of episode time, there's a whole subplot where Illyria has to pretend to be Fred, but then...
Because her parents visit.
Yeah. But then what was going to happen was season 6 apparently was going to have stuff where the memories of Fred was going to start creating a split personality, so that she was going to be both, or like or having some kind of like personality disorder where she can't control them or something like that. And I think Amy Acker was almost about to dye her hair blue. To save the makeup, save the makeup stuff. But there was also plans there was talk of Seth Green returning for season 6 for a couple of episodes. Because I think
that would have been awesome.
Because I think Nina was going to be either a semi-regular or have a bigger role in 6 as well.
Right.
So I think Nina might have been in 6, but which is saying, because rewatching Not Fade Away for the first time in years, I was like, I still kind of really like it, and I kind of appreciate what it's doing, but then I'm like, yeah, you can kind of see they're trying to rush and get some kind of ending to it.
It's a shame, really. Both the Gunn storyline and the Nina storyline were a bit meh because they were rushed. Whereas the Illyria thing I did find interesting, which is obviously the next stage on from the Gunn storyline. And I also thought that it was nice to see Harmony getting a bit more here. But again, it felt like, why did you do that? She was part of the gang for like 5 minutes and then went back to her old self again. And I'm like, well, why did you bother? But now I'm thinking that's why Dev's point is that it was all rushed.
Yeah, because I do remember hearing as well, that's why Spike comes in season 5. They were really hoping the return of Spike would drive up ratings so they could get a season 6. So I think they wanted more stuff with Spike, but he ended up just being in one season. Yeah, I mean, the stuff with Harmony, though, that's just Whedon, isn't it? Late series Buffy always did weird things with their characters, where he's like, oh no, characters have to do bad things and, bad things have to happen to people.
I've always thought Spike worked better when he was the original Cordelia character. So Cordelia was basically there to antagonise would be the tactless, no bullshit, call it as it is character. And she came that in like season 2 and 3 where she was just like, had no tact and just basically called it as it was. Spike was kind of that in season 4, and that role was taken over by Anya in 5, 6 and 7 as the kind of straight-faced, this calls it as it is. Season 4 of Buffy has its kind of moments, but I've always thought that was one of Spike's best seasons because basically he's there to piss people off, and that's his role in season 5, and I just love the kind of antagonistic the brothers that kind of not get on relationship between Spike and Angel.
Yeah, very much so. I remember vividly the fallout between Wesley and Angel, where Angel, not Angelus, tried to kill Wesley because he stole his son. Mm-hmm. But of course, that was weirdly resolved and Wesley doesn't know. So Angel's gone back to confiding in Wesley. And I think that's so bleak.
One of the things that I noticed rewatching the last third is that season 5 does actually do a decent job in slowly unraveling and basically showing the characters one of the reasons that perhaps they've been slightly seduced and by Wolfram and Hart. It's the whole origin episode where Connor shows up and basically there's a not thread where Wesley pretty much finds out that Angel signed some kind of reality altering thing and thinks that he sold out Fred and basically inadvertently undoes the memories and brings back all the memories. So he had no idea of what he did with Connor. Mm. But then there's no kind of real conversation between them and Angel, apart from like a nod in Not Fade Away. So there's no real kind of follow-up from that. Apart from a kind of conversation between Illyria and Wesley saying, oh, does this make you Wesley now that you know? And like kind of Wesley's almost like traumatized. But I think they never really had enough time for him to process that.
I mean, if we're talking awkward characterization, or not characterization, but I mean awkward characters, man, Angel is pretty awkward of Nina this episode.
Oh, it's wonderful.
I remember reading stuff in analysing, particularly when Buffy was on air, that there are points in Buffy's kind of run where Buffy was becoming like the least interesting character on the show.
Oh, that's without a doubt my opinion of the whole thing, is that the whole show brought interesting characters to kind of revolve around Buffy. I'd never felt like that was the case with Angel.
No, and as much as I love Wesley, I still think that throughout the whole show, subjectively I could try and argue the toss with Wesley, but Angel I think is a much stronger main character, and particularly I think it's part of it because David Boreanaz does really well as him. Angel as a character works so well and is perhaps more selfless, almost like one of the kind of like champion characters that I think fiction needs in terms of like he'll throw himself in front of a stake to save a random person.
And I think the perfect happiness concept that's looked at very briefly here is, again, so very, very tragic. He's confiding in Wesley about his being scared that if he has a moment of perfect happiness with Nina, he will do what he did in series, I want to say two of Buffy, where he becomes angelus again. And what's not really discussed is it worth it if I don't? Because if it's not true love, if it's not that perfect love, it's not as valuable as love as he had with Buffy. So is it worth it?
I think Wes sort of gets at that, doesn't he?
Yeah.
He says like 99.99 ad infinitum is average love people accept. But then it's rich him saying that, because in this very fucking episode he gets with his true love. So
true.
I don't think that concept's actually brought forward a lot. I don't think that concept's really delved into a lot more, because part of me was never fully comfortable with the Angel Cordelia thing, if I'm completely honest. There's something about that just felt really weird. I know some people are probably like disagree with me on that. Well, tough. But yeah, I don't know. I've always been someone who finds a lot more interest in platonic relationships, and I think having Angel and Cordelia being more platonic and should have been stayed platonic, rather than having the weird kind of flirty romantic vibes, was slightly more interesting. But this idea that, I'm surprised it's taken like nearly 8 years of the Buffyverse for someone to say, yeah, but you're not going to achieve perfect happiness every time you have sex with just random people, are you? Because I think the idea being that the reason you lost your soul was because it was Buffy. So there's nothing stopping you from like going out and getting your end away. There's nothing stopping you from kind of exploring that, because you're not going to really be perfectly happy. But I quite like the idea that Angel, the character himself, again, this is why I really quite like Angel, the character. Angel kind of feels self-defeating, that if that's the point, as if it's not perfect happiness, then why should I pursue relationships?
Exactly.
And again, that fits with Angel's character in his kind of view of the world, in that because he wants to believe in the good of people and he will fight for the good of people. What's the point in kind of chasing that? But again, it's a nice parallel to basically what happens in the finale, in terms of, well, nothing really matters. You just make sure that you can fight, or you do what you need to do to make sure that people carry on the way that they are and stuff. And I think it's kind of really rushed and not explored as much because of the cancellation. You can kind of see those kind of themes working its way in, and I'm losing my track of thought now.
Well, it does work with the whole theme of Angel, doesn't it? That he is never going to defeat the evil. They're never going to actually win. And then that's it. Wolfram and Hart and all that evil just goes away.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, he has to settle with just the daily routine of it's fine. That's good enough.
Yeah. I mean, have you read about how much do you know about the Shanshu?
The name doesn't ring a bell, but yeah, I know how the show ends.
Okay, Shanshu with LA is the season 1 finale, and one of my favourite finales in the whole of the Buffyverse, actually. I think that's probably my top 5 of Angel episodes of all time, because I remember kind of watching it, being really excited. The idea being is there's this prophecy with Angel, and they find this prophecy, and Angel's drawn to it. Wesley reads it and thinks, oh, the angel with the soul will die. But then at the very end of the episode, it's like, no, you're going to live. And he gets confused. And the idea being that Angel will die, but then become human as a reward for being champion of fighting the good fights. His reward will be that he'll become human again. One of the good, clever things that the show kind of does, seen in the last episode, is that Angel has to give that away and signs the Shanshu prophecy to spoil it. Anyone listening to this, I apologise for any spoilers, but I'm just spoiling the last episode. But Angel signs away the rights, basically nulls that prophecy, so he'll never become human as a reward. But he does it without batting an eyelid, so that he can become like a sleeper agent in this like massive circle of the evilest of evil people. But he does it because he knows that he has to basically take out a good chunk of evil by the end of the series. And again, going back to what I was talking about with Angel as a character being the selfless, like sacrificing hero, the hero that LA needs, but that doesn't deserve, to kind of paraphrase the Dark Knight. It sums up Angel as a character perfectly. The themes of Angel links into the discussion about kind of the soul and happiness and all that kind of stuff. And I think it's really well done.
God, you made me think then when you talked about the whole Angelus curse and everything. I didn't even think about this when watching Buffy. That would really fuck me up knowing that. Because I don't necessarily believe in stuff like soulmates and like perfect happiness, like am I with the perfect partner and stuff like that. But like knowing there's an actual like magic metric on that, like, oh, and Angel achieved perfect happiness with someone. And it's like that would just make me think like, am I doing that? Because like that is a barometer to meet now.
Yeah. So I want to talk about how Lorne is basically just a plot device in this episode, which is a sad waste of a fantastic character. But across the series, he's actually a remarkable character. So it's unfortunate we're not really going to get to talk about Lorne as he's not in this. The next big note I have in my note is just how incredibly good the Angel puppet is.
Yeah, it's very cool. It kind of does that Chucky thing where by the end of it, you're just like, yeah, that's just a character. Like, you don't really think about the artifice behind it, because there is quite a lot of life to it.
Absolutely. And I've put here, the eyebrows make it. And there's obviously some real thought into making it look like David Boreanaz as Angel, some gentle kind of jabs at his physical appearance. But
he is perpetually sad.
Yeah.
With a big frown.
But it's, when you think about, this is one episode into getting this puppet right.
It feels like one of those things where it's like setting up the puppet and the puppeteers behind like the desk and stuff. Like that takes more time.
It does feel like a showcase episode, like Once More with Feeling, like Hush. I just love the puppet. What's your opinion of the puppet, Matt?
I love it. I think it looks great. I think it does have a kind of parody of stereotypical angelness of the character with that scowl, the kind of constant brooding look. Hilarious. As well as the hair.
And yet it still manages to stay cute, despite being grumpy as fuck.
Definitely, yeah. But I think if there's something I can criticise the episode on is that the idea that the puppet form is kind of enhancing or kind of changing Angel's emotional state.
That was, I felt, a very tagged on line by Gunn when he says something like, oh, he's got proportional puppet emotion. What? Yeah. What does that mean?
Yeah. So like when he starts suddenly getting hyperactive and kind of like overly animated, it's not fully explained, and the episode tries to write around it.
Again, because he looks so much like a Muppet, they tried to make him more Muppety, and that line, I just don't think it was needed. It's implicit that he's a puppet, so I know what you mean.
Yeah, I can imagine them getting a producer's note. Oh, why does he act like this? Just because he's a puppet. It doesn't need explaining. Either they have a whole scene talking about why he's different or nothing. That's their compromise.
Yeah, so like I don't know whether it's just trying so that they can get him to kind of like hug Fred. I don't know. That's always kind of like I've never fully understood where he suddenly starts trying to be overly hyperactive and try to explain it away and everything. And you can probably say it's just the shock of turning into a puppet, but I don't know. Because then suddenly he goes, oh, it's smile time, it's smile time, it's smile time. And then tries to go and watch the show for...
But again, that could be construed as part of the spell.
True.
That, he wants to watch smile time because he's a puppet now. But what I think is really fascinating about this scene, and I'd like Dev's opinion on this actually, every character's reaction to seeing Angel as a puppet is really, really good kind of character depiction for that specific character. Did you feel like you learned a lot about the characters as you saw them react to the puppet, Dev?
As for each individual character, I don't know, maybe I'd have to rewatch it for that. But I did read, other than just trivia, I read a couple reviews of it. And someone did note that the only character to ask earnestly if Angel's okay was Nina. Everyone else kind of like, not in a mean way, but I guess because they're so used to weird shit happening every week, no one really properly asks what Angel's going through. They just sort of like, they acknowledge that it's just funny.
Even Fred is distracted by what's going on in the love life and the science lab. Yeah, you're right. I think Spike's reaction is my favourite.
Well, that's fitting Spike,
wasn't it? Yeah. It's like, no one knows this does not go beyond these walls. And then suddenly Spike walks in. You're a bloody puppet!
Wonderful.
And you've got James Masters must have really enjoyed having to scrap with a Muppet. He seems to be enjoying that scene a bit too much.
I love that he gets jobbed out to a puppet.
Yeah.
I think that's actually said when I went on the Wikipedia. They had to do a couple takes because Masters was really getting into it and like throwing him around. Which works because it's probably the closest you can get to being like, that's not real because how they puppet it, but still, even, in the action and in the comedy of it where you're laughing at it, yeah, it's totally believable that you can just believe that that puppet is alive.
I've always held belief that in an actual fight, Angel would own Spike easily. Well, also because the show's called Angel, but what did you take on the cavemen versus astronauts? Or is that's not this episode, is it?
That's not this episode. I have seen that. That was a very funny scene.
What I like about this as well is there's a cheeky nod to regular watchers, regular fans. They bring the mustard guy back, and the mustard guy plays Frampkin, and the mustard guy is David Fury, who is a producer of both Buffy and Angel. Mustard guy was a lol, whereas I think he does a pretty good job here. He's not an actor, and he gets some lines, and he genuinely portrays fear. Yeah, I think he does a really good job. I just wonder why they cast him rather than getting an actor.
I'm not sure, actually. I mean, the visual is quite striking. Is that the first?
Yeah,
that's the first time you see that the puppets are puppeteering the humans.
That's when you see Polo pull his hand out of the back of him. Yeah, it's grim.
That's quite a dark image. I do wonder whether the casting of Fury is a case of, like, because it's a comedy episode, I'm wondering whether it's a way of misdirecting the longer term viewers who, like me and Mark, will be going, it's the mustard guy, it's David Fury in a cameo. And then suddenly, when he suddenly slumps, I think that's meant to kind of suddenly unnerve the longer term viewer, because we're kind of caught up in it's David Fury, and when his true nature is kind of revealed of what has happened to him, I think that's supposed to kind of like be a misdirect, and I think his casting's deliberate for that.
Yeah, it is quite jarring, and I think you're right. They got the mustard out. It's fucking great.
The mustard out.
And that is silly and a cameo for someone involved in the show. You're like, why the fuck have they cast David Fury? Oh, that's grim.
Yeah, I don't know him as well as you guys do, but I would imagine the first persona, when he's really friendly, I imagine that is probably something what he's like. And they're like, it's something like, David Fury could host a kids' TV show like this. He could be a friend. He's a friendly guy. But then, you are right, Mark. Oh, he's the friendly guy, and then he's the dead guy in pain. But there's also the other in-between one when he's threatening Gunn and Latham put up a fight, and he's a little bit sinister there. For a very small part, he gets a good range of acting there.
But it does feel like more than a cameo. This is a role. This isn't they got the mustard out and then jazz hands. This is an actual important role in the episode.
Yeah, because you do think he's the bad guy for a solid minute.
Well, let's talk about Ratio. Ratio is super cute, almost like Chewie, in as much as everyone around him knows what he's saying, even though he's just making nonsense noises. I mean, it's not quite it's like peep, 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 peep. It's fascinating that it is so well done that this is a cutesy character. Even though it's like peep, 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 he's still really, really nasty. And that's interesting because obviously you can turn the other puppets and make them scowl and make their voices change. This is basically a cross between Sweep from Sooty and Bungle. And it's nasty and it shouldn't work, but it really does.
I see him as kind of like the muscle henchman. He's the muscle, like the intimidating muscle. That's what his kind of true nature is, but he's got that kind of look of like a big bird crossed with Sweep.
Yeah.
I quite like that kind of twist with that. So you've got basically all these kind of cutesy Sesame Street characters just going bonkers. It's like if the Snuffleupagus became somebody tried to kill you.
Yeah.
which I still think that he probably would. I think I'm convinced Snuffy's got a dark side.
It is really funny that we're spending so much time on one of the secondary puppets when like this is like the main scene for Polo, the main one. And also really the main scene for all of them, really. This is the only scene, like, it's that sort of condensedness of Gunn explaining why Angel acts the way he is, or later when Gunn just understands completely what their plan is. But it is quite a a very brief scene where you get to see the puppets be evil
Mm.
and like explore their plan. There's a lot of exposition. We don't really get to know the characters too well. They're just dickwads, as Polo himself says.
No, I think you're right. And I think, bizarrely, it's Ratio that, even though he doesn't say a word other than beep, beep, strangely is one of the more fleshed out characters.
Yeah, true.
Moving on, I want to briefly talk about the gun storyline, even though it isn't very puppet related. In fact, it's not puppet related. But Dr. Sparrow, I don't feel like that was the character we would ever have seen in Buffy. He's too nasty. He's too grim. He's too Lovecraftian in his malevolence. I was creeped the fuck out by him, like a real Rumpelstiltskin kind of vibe, but not a kid's thing. Really effective, I thought. What were your opinions of Dr. Sparrow?
I think at this point, characters are moving into Wolfram and Hart. I think he's just a very stereotypical. By the time you get to Gunn, whatever happens with Gunn happens in the opener of season 5. I think Sparrow is pretty much the kind of character you kind of almost expect to work in Wolfram and Hart.
Yes.
So I think by the time he shows up, he's not really a surprise. Yeah, I can kind of see what's kind of happening. I don't think it's anything special or anything twisty or anything in the subject that kind of like twist the norm of, or twist the perception of Angel that perhaps it sometimes does. But as the inevitable Gunn losing his kind of new skill set comes in, he's pretty much by the numbers. Oh, I can do this for you, but you need to do this one thing for me. If anything, I think Nox is slightly more of, at this point anyway, more of a kind of subversion of the kind of Wolfram and Hart employee that Sparrow isn't. That makes sense?
Oh, yeah, I think that's fair.
Yeah.
I just think that the creepiness and the nastiness and the manipulativeness is something we might not have seen in Buffy.
That I believe true, yeah. It's, again, the kind of overly evilness of Wolfram and Hart just kicking into play.
I did like that bit where he talks to Gunn about the upgrade he got. Where, well, they gave that to you for a reason, and they probably took it away for a reason. Like, why had Gunn assume Wolfram and Hart would give him that upgrade just out of the kindness of their own hearts?
I think that's interesting, though, isn't it? In a lot of ways, Wesley is portrayed as naive, and he is when it comes to romance. But he's remarkably cynical and capable when it actually comes to the rogue demon hunter element of his work by the time we get to this point. Whereas Gunn is inept and naive in very, very different ways. He could probably get the girl, but he's not all that bright. And I think it's fascinating that the bright guy wanted to be blessed with intelligence. And then when he loses I think it's just really nicely done.
What happens with Gunn and Dr. Sparrow technically isn't actually Wolfram and Hart. I think it's actually the like free agents kind of working their own kind of agenda to bring back an old one. Because I'm pretty sure in a later episode, Marcus Hamilton, when he shows up, says that whatever was ever happening to, basically whatever happened to Fred wasn't actually the senior partners, it was something else. So there's a whole thing about, because the show always kind of plays with destiny and free will. This is the free will of these followers of this ancient god wanting to bring it back, which again, the show doesn't really have time to kind of delve into this point. So
I did feel like Gunn's return to Lawyer Smooth, where the next scene he's back and he's there and he's got the knowledge. I found that strangely like grim and incongruous and really effective.
Yeah, I took it from that as well. There's a real darkly comic irony to that scene as well, when he just talks so casually about like that hell has like public record and they do like inventory and like paperwork and stuff on deals and stuff that go back years. And it's like, there's kind of something horrifying and sad about the fact that like if Team Angel were intelligent enough, like Gunn is right here, then they could probably solve their cases a lot easier with what's available. But they just don't/can't.
There's something truly, truly grim about hell being a bureaucracy, isn't it?
Yeah. Hey, all the paperwork's there. You just got to go through it. It fits the character. It works for the character development, but it is also very cheeky exposition so that everyone knows that the puppets are evil.
Yeah. You mentioned this when we talked about the theme tune, Matt. Both Buffy and Angel were quite regularly filming scenes that were designed to be like the hero leading his followers as part of the theme tune. That changed regularly on each series of both shows. And I love how they parody themselves with the puppet leading the band of heroes behind him. And I would have loved to have seen that make the theme tune.
Yeah, or at least going through and no, you can't really get away with changing the title sequence for that episode because you haven't seen him as the puppet yet, did you?
No, exactly. Yeah, that would have been a massive spoiler. So it wouldn't have worked. But I liked the kind of like cheeky self-referential satire and like a nod. It's meta, and I'm good with meta. Again, I want to talk about more puppetry stuff. I think maybe this is what we should be talking about rather than the long-term plots. And Ratio's run absolutely popped me. I howled with laughter. You know, when you're like laughing at something so much that you start to miss what's going on? I nearly had to pause. And the comedy and the puppetry in this episode, there's a reason why it won a fucking Hugo. Because they really, really went to town and really cared and were really thoughtful about getting the puppetry right.
Yeah, I agree with that. They wanted to have an air of authenticity so that at least it felt like the people that they were parodying could say, yeah, that looks like an authentic thing.
But there's, there is a tradition of characters like Big Bird, characters like Bungle in Rainbow, of a person dressed in a costume interacting with some of the puppets. Yeah, I think Ratio is my favourite of all the puppets. I think he's brilliant.
Didn't really have a malevolent streak, so they didn't have their own version of vamping when suddenly all their eyes turned to like really have massive bags under their eyes and the eyebrows inverted. That's
True.
Because they did that with the blue male and the female, the yellow one, and the dog kind of almost metamorphosis. And they like almost vamped out on their own with like the evilness.
Yeah, it wasn't quite the vamping out, but there was kind of like a difference between their public image and then when they were being themselves as the evil thing. It was a bit more subtle than the vamp version of Angel. Again, this episode, we've been talking about all the really grim stuff, like the terrible decision that Gunn has to make, the awkward stuff between Wesley and Fred. That whilst that stuff is strong, the comedy, the puppetry, this episode is just bang on, and somebody somewhere came up with this concept and they did it so damn well.
What I like with that as well is that it comes to the point where I think as the viewer you probably forget that Angel can vamp out because he doesn't. So you're enjoying, it's funny, and then you suddenly remember that crap is when he suddenly morphs to the vampire, like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. I didn't realise he'd be able to vamp out as a puppet.
And it's so well done as well. And it also, from a very cynical, looking at the world like He-Man point of view, it's another puppet that they can sell, innit?
Yeah.
Again, like in terms of the tone of the episode, like there was some really good horror in this episode, but like they ended on the right note. Like, yeah, let's just kick this puppet's asses and have it be kind of funny. Yeah, I do find it kind of odd that he did the vamp out thing and that scared Polo. But then instead of doing anything vampiric, he just throws Polo as hard as he can through a wall.
Yeah, I had a quick look. The Angel vampire puppet, or a replica of it that you can get it for about 150 quid on eBay.
Bloody hell. That's expensive, but perhaps not as much as I thought it would cost. Now, while we were talking, I've looked up Avenue Q. I was wondering what came first. Avenue Q started in 2003 off Broadway and actually managed to get to Broadway by the end of 2003. So Avenue Q was about a year old when this was launched. I would be surprised if it was that influenced this, but it did give me some Avenue Q vibes because, puppets with adult themes. There's no real kind of like lustiness or anything that's covered in Avenue Q in this other than adult puppets, really.
No, I was going to say, I don't think there is a coincidence there because I looked it up. People that played the puppets in this, I was like, are they voice actors? Are they anything? Yeah, the puppeteers for this who did the voices, they also did stuff like Sesame Street and the Muppets and stuff like that. But I noticed a few of them, like Polo, they worked on the show Crank Yankers, which is another adult puppet show. It's like, it's puppets, but like they do prank phone calls. And that was 2002. Seems like it was just the millennium was the time for adult orientated puppets.
But I mean, shout out to Avenue Q. It is great.
Oh, it's brilliant.
Have you seen Avenue Q, Dev?
I haven't. I had to look it up. I didn't know what it was.
I've seen it a couple of times and it's so much fun. I think it's still going.
Weirdly enough, also in 2002, there was another show. Did either of you see Greg the Bunny?
No. But I've always wanted to see because Because there's a Buffy link to it, but I'll let you explain it.
Yeah, Greg the Bunny. It's like humans and Muppets working together. The Muppets themselves would do it later with like their Office theme show. But it's like, it's like a behind the scenes look at a Sesame Street show where humans and puppets work together. And the main creator and actor is Seth Green.
Huh.
Yeah, I've never watched it, but I remember when it first kind of aired and stuff, I was like, oh, I need to check that out, and I never did.
If I remember right, it was pretty good. It was sort of like BoJack Horseman, where it's funny, but then it gets really dark and sad.
Yeah.
I've sat through this episode and loved it, but I've not actually made that many notes. The next note I've got is I would totally go for a date with Puppet Angel and go for breakfast. If you fancied someone and they were a puppet the next day, how would you deal with this? I think it's so ridiculous that you'd probably just have to go on a date with a puppet, wouldn't you? Would you go on a date with a puppet?
Yeah, sure. It is a nice breakfast for them because there is the weird subplot where Nina thinks she's killed Angel.
Oh yeah, because there's that great line where I think where Lorne picks up and goes, "We need a medic or a tailor, need a medic or a seamstress or something like that."
Yeah.
Kind of an odd subplot that where Angel gets absolutely destroyed, and then just in the next scene he's fine.
Well, yeah, because he gets sewed back together, doesn't he?
But then he has the claws on the face then, because he has the Nina's scratch marks for the rest of the episode.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because that was a note of mine. And so the weird magic logic of this, that he doesn't look like Bride of Chucky, or he doesn't look like Chucky in Bride of Chucky, and that he's all stitched together like Frankenstein. Weirdly, the scratch marks on him are new felt, technically.
Yes.
So weird logic to that.
Well, vampires heal very fast, so maybe that's where the felt comes from. I don't know why I'm trying to put logic into this, and I don't think anyone really thought about it, like you say.
Also, strangely, that Nina would attack him. Why is a werewolf trying to eat felt?
Yeah, the werewolf lore in Buffy is, I think there's the primal nature of the wolf takes over, so there's not really any kind of like control from the human side, and the humans don't really have any knowledge or memory of what they do as a wolf. I think some might.
She can't eat a puppet, and the primal urge is to kill a thing to eat it, and you can't eat felt.
Maybe that's why Angel survived. She bit him a bit and then was like, oh no, this doesn't taste good.
Yeah, but then dogs will just chew anything. My sister's dog just
that is true.
Just destroys everything that he's been given. So
yeah, that's the nature there.
To prove it.
Ah, and then obviously at the end there is Wes and Fred getting together, and that is where Angel ends. There are no more episodes of Angel ever. They all live happily ever after, and we don't need to think about what happens other than Wes and Fred living together in perfect happiness forever and ever and ever.
Yes, but then you are writing out Spike's clipboard adds continuity, and I can't forgive you for that.
Oh.
You hit me, and I put that on my clipboard.
Is there anything else you two wanted to talk about on this episode?
I can talk about Angel for hours and hours.
This episode specifically, you've been bad enough anyway.
Yeah. I do want to point out that when you mentioned this is Angel Not Angelus and the pillow thing, I still have vivid memories of watching that for the first time and my jaw dropping.
Yeah.
One thing, because this was the first time I watched it for, as I said, ages. What struck me actually was, and I'm gonna find it interesting rewatching the first half of season 5, was the mechanics for the first 10, 12 minutes. Very naughty legal drama, formulaic, procedural. So like this felt like it was almost like Boston Legal at times. It was, oh yeah, so and so. Oh yeah, we've got this case. Blah 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 blah. Then you cut to kind of like the quirky receptionist kind of talking to another member of the cast. It was very, very procedural, and I was like, I don't remember Angel ever feeling like the good wife or something, or anything like that. So there's just like this weird moment where I felt so 2004, and I'm like, yeah, well, it wasn't 2004, but almost formulate plots that, okay, it did do, and particularly season 5 especially. But yeah, that kind of struck me immediately, and I don't know whether that's because I've been watching like The Good Wife, like a few months ago. I've been binging all that for the first time, so I don't know whether that kind of formulaic nature kind of
maybe that's deliberate in as much as you get the really creepy puppety cold open, and then you get 5 or so minutes of really kind of procedural, legal, there in Wolfram and Hart, to give you the massive kind of like, oh shit moment when he turns into a fucking puppet.
True, yeah. I'm wondering whether that as well is... I wonder if at this point, whether it's something that was supposed to try and get newer viewers in, or anyone who's just casual viewers back into it.
Yeah, I don't want to say it's cribbing on them, but like I do think, a lot of the, as you say, the formula, well, not formula, tone, how'd you say? Style.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's, like Law and Order and stuff would be very popular at this time, so kind of copying that. And also, like, you can tell it's post-CSI, like CSI had started only a couple of years before this because Fred can do anything in the lab. Like, she can break down plasma on a subcellular level.
But then again, though, it's probably a haunted, magical, like, microscope or something, so they've got that anyway. But yeah, it was just like so you have this specialist, then it cuts to the science specialist, then you got someone saying, oh, yes, quirky science character to do this, can look at this. Yes, it's blah, 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 blah. Yes, the legal person, blah, 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 blah. Oh, yes, now we have a scene where another member of the ensemble is talking to the fit, attractive, blonde receptionist who doesn't really have a role in the ensemble apart from to try and get the glamour shots up in the cast photos, which is like,
wow.
I'm quite cynical on most of the procedural dramas, as you can tell.
Really?
But yeah, I found that quite fascinating though, and to be fair, Good Wife was 2009, but I did find that kind of nostalgic kind of like pang for that kind of formulaic network TV thing, and it just jumped out at me because I never really saw Buffy and Angel as that kind of procedural.
I think they are just sort of like subverting and playing with what is successful at the time. Like, I think that's why Buffy was so successful, because it was teen drama, but with all the monster stuff. So it had that very good Venn diagram of stereotypical boys and girls both could get into Buffy. As deep and as interesting, as complex as Angel is, it's maybe less of a safe bet for them. The audience for Buffy and Law and Order is not as one-to-one.
I mean, season 1 of Angel is quite formulaic in terms of its structure, and I think there's a case for pretty much some of season 2 as well. It is a private detective show more than anything. I think it's just because the ensemble is like 3 people at that time, so it doesn't feel as vast as it is. It is more or less almost an early 90s public access private eye detective show, more or less. I never saw Angel as that big ensemble show, so yeah, I just found that quite interesting at the time. So
Right, well, we've finished our 3-week run that was supposed to be a 2-week run, but is now a 3-week run of random puppety episodes of cult telly. And it's been a lot of fun. I hope people have enjoyed it too. And Matt, before we go, let everyone know where they can find you on the internet.
Yes, well, you can find me on Facebook, Instagram, possibly X/Twitter, or Twax, or whatever it's called.
We're not calling it X, are we? It's fucking Twitter.
Well, you can probably find me more on Threads or Blue Sky, more than perhaps the artist formerly known as Twitter at the moment. But if you search for Pick a Disc, then it's probably me on there. So you can find me about my music podcast, where I talk to people about albums that they like. At the time of this is airing, I shall be in season 2 on my other podcast, Ask Us About Loom, where I talk about adventure games, point-and-click adventures, and interactive fiction, etc., etc., etc. So if you search for Ask Us About Loom, it's on that.
Dev, what about you?
Me, I barely use social media, so I'm on Twitter, though I don't tweet much. Also, check out Frame Rated, or my Medium. Oh yeah, on Twitter and Medium, I'm going to say, at Absolute Travesty. Check out my Medium, because I do have a couple of horror retrospectives coming out.
Cool.
And you Mark?
I can be found on Twitter, Instagram, at MarkAdamsHC. The other podcast I do alongside Matt. It's called Shipwrecked and Comatose. It is a podcast about Red Dwarf, right here on the We Made This Podcast Network. At Red Dwarf Pod on Twitter. And, well, if you're listening to this, just search for Shipwrecked and Comatose on whatever platform you are using to listen to ChuckyVision. And on that note, thank you so much for joining us for this lovely 3-week run. All being well, our next episode will be an episode looking at the first episode of series 3 of Chucky. I'm excited. Are you excited, Dev?
Of course, especially since, now they've they've revealed plot elements and stuff. We know it's going to Washington. It's going to be more satirical than ever, even more so than season 2.
It's going to have epic levels of batshittery, I think, and I'm all for it. So until then, wanna play
ChuckyVision is a podcast brought to you by the We Made This network. Follow us on Twitter at ChuckyVision. Follow the network on Twitter at WMT_network. Our website is WeMadeThisNetwork.com. The logo was designed by Carl Bryan, and the theme tune composed by Dark Fantasy Studios. Wanna play?
Do you like music and do you like podcasts? Chances are you like music podcasts. Take this one for example, Pick a Disc. I'm Matt Latham, and every fortnight a guest comes on to Pick a Disc to talk about an album for any reason that they want to. We'll talk about the album as a whole, we talk about songs, we talk about any personal stories about the album, and if they've ever seen the band live, and all sorts of other crazy tangents. And if at any point any of that made you want to listen to Pick a Disc, then you can find us on your podcast apps of choice or on the Facebooks and Twitters and Instagram under Pick a Disc. We're also on the We Made This Podcast Network on WeMadeThisNetwork.com and on Twitter at We_made_this. Goodbye.
Shipwrecked and Comatose, a Red Dwarf podcast, was created and produced by Mark Adams and Kurt North. You can find us on Twitter at Red Dwarf Pod, and we are part of the We Made This Podcast network.